So we're now going to be continuing on with our interval worksheet, orientating around this D note. And as we do that, we will of course be building basically a D Dorian scale. Let's do a quick recap of how the D Dorian fits into all the other modes, so that as we get good at these exercises, the idea is that you can basically take 15 minutes to a half hour or whatever you got, whenever you got it, and try to cram as much of this kind of theory stuff in your mind as you can, hopefully at some point without the worksheet even, so that you can get a better idea of it on an incremental basis. That's what I've been doing here. I've gotten a lot better at it. Not perfect at it. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a musical scholar at this point, but I feel like I'm definitely have improvements happening on the basic understandings here. So we've got the major scale or Ionian mode. That's going to be basically kind of like our Rosetta Stone. This time we're looking at the Dorian, but we always want to be comparing it back to the Ionian because, again, that's kind of like the Rosetta Stone. That's the thing we compare things to oftentimes in Western music. When we learn the fretboard, we can do so in multiple different ways. We can learn just the shapes on the fretboard, which is the thing that was most attractive to me as an accountant, because I see that the fretboard is just a spreadsheet, which annoys people when I say that to people, because that doesn't sound artistic or something, and which actually incentivizes me to prove my point, and that's actually motivating. That's a high motivation for my guitar practice to prove it's a spreadsheet. Okay. In any case, so that means that we are just building a shape on the spreadsheet, and as we move the shape from one scale and related modes to another scale and related modes, we could just shift the shape up and down. Now, that's one way to look at it, but then you're not really understanding the interval relationships if you do it that way, and you can't really as easily build chords in such a way that you know the chords. You can build chords by just saying I'm building notes within the shape, right? But you don't really know exactly what note is what, and more specifically, or more importantly, you don't know the intervals, which is really the thing that you want to know, that's so that you can mirror what you're doing as you move from shape to shape. The other way you can learn things or map this shape out is to basically use what I would call the formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, from the perspective of the C, and then use the related starting points of the other notes, which would mean playing in Dorian, Phrygian, and so on. And maybe I'm thinking about putting a worksheet together that focuses more on that at a future point. But for right now, that's still the least useful in my mind of the ways that I think about it typically. But then you have the intervals, which means you start at a center point and you measure around the intervals, which is our point of focus here. Now, we're always kind of focusing in on the C major scale and the related modes. That's quite common in Western music, because those are all the natural notes without any of the sharps and flats, which gives you kind of an internal control, kind of a check to make sure that you're getting things right. Because if you hit a note that has a sharp or a flat in it, then you know you're out of whack. And so that helps. But because it's all symmetrical on the guitar, you could just flip it. You could just move everything up, and everything will basically work in another key, is the great thing to it. Also, the C major has a relative minor of A, Aeolian, which is perfect for our main shape, which I call shape number 1, from pentatonic shape, 7-note shape, like that. So that's perfectly positioned right in the middle of the fretboard, fret number 5, which is the way I would recommend learning the shapes, because that allows you to grow naturally both to the left of the shape and to the right of the shape, as opposed to just learning things linearly one way. If you learn things linearly one way, there's nothing wrong with that, but you notice you learn things in a series, and then you're going to have to learn things the other way. And you can see this by counting numbers. We can count from 1 to 10 a lot easier than we can count from 10 back down to 1. Because of rocket ship liftoffs, you might be able to count from 10 down to 1 pretty easily, but if you count from 100 down, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. We can count from A to G pretty easily with the musical alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but if you count from G back to A, that's a little bit more difficult. The same thing applies out when I learn my scales. I can learn the scale shape just tactically, tactically, with your fingers, tactilely, like that. But if I work in the middle of the shape, then it's going to take more work to do that because I learned it from top to bottom. And that's going to be one of the problems with the guitar. We want to kind of break things up so that I'm not learning. I don't have to start the alphabet over all the time so that I can sing the song from the beginning. We've all done that, right? We're going to say, what M and O or M versus P, which comes first? Well, let me sing it out here from top to bottom. Well, if you really knew it, you'd be able to visualize it from any point. And that's basically what the modes are doing, right? The modes are saying, I want to be able to visualize it not starting from the C, but to visualize it from every point in the progression, which allows us to do a lot more things because now I can start from basically different places. I don't have to start at the beginning of the alphabet in order to file something in an alphabetical order because it happens to be an O, and I don't know where the O lands unless I count the alphabet and sing it in my head, which makes me look stupid in the office while I'm trying to file things because I feel stupid singing A, B, C, D, E, F, G when I'm trying to file things because I feel like I'm in Sesame Street when I'm in an accounting office, and that's not appropriate. That's what I feel like. So we're working on the intervals here. So the first thing we want to do is learn the intervals for the major scale, and then we compare the other modes to it. That's the easiest way to do it. So these are the intervals for the major scale, and once we learn the major scale, we learn the minor, the main minor, which is the Aeolian, and then all the other modes we compare to those two. So this time we're working on the Dorian, which we compare to the Aeolian because there will only be one interval difference. So let me explain that in a little bit more detail. We've got the Ionian, the Rosetta Stone, the major key. The two modes similar to the Ionian are the Lydian and Mixolydian, which I would call mode number 4 and 5, which in this case the related modes would be F and G all having the same notes as the C major. So F Lydian and G Mixolydian have the same notes as the C major. They are major modes. If you measured from those notes, there's only going to be one interval difference between them and the major scale. So that's great. That allows us then to tweak the major scale to either the Lydian or the Mixolydian pretty easily. And then we have the minor mode, which is going to be kind of like the opposite or the most different from the major scale, in which case normally we would take all of the intervals on the major scale, flatten them, and then keep the perfects the same, except for the second, which for some reason is still a 2-note away major second. Once we do that, we have the minor modes, and we can compare the two other minor modes to the main minor, which is the Aeolian, the two minor modes being the Dorian and the Phrygian. So we're on the Dorian at this point in time. So now that we know that so if we compare to the Aeolian, there's only going to be one interval difference, which is going to be the sixth, which still has a major 6. So let's look at this. We're going to say, what are the intervals for the major scale? It's a 0-note away perfect first, 2-note away major second, 4-note away major third, 5-note away perfect fourth, 7-note away perfect fifth, 9-note away major 6, 11-note away major 7. What would be the intervals for the related minor scale then? Well, all of these majors would flip to minors, except for some reason, the 2-note away major second, which would still be major. Then what's the difference for the Dorian to the minor? Well, there's going to be one interval difference, and that'll be the sixth, which remains a major 6. So let's take a look at that. So if I go down here, this is the Dorian. If I look at these intervals, all I've done is made the second note in our progression now the first note. So it would be like counting them, if I counted the alphabet A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but I started on B, that's basically all we're doing here, right? We're starting on the second, which is the second mode. I would call it the Dorian mode as it relates to, or the second mode, which is Dorian as it relates to the major scale. And so then we're going to say, what are the intervals? Well, if I measure from that second note, the D instead of the C, it's still a perfect first as related to the D. Everything's going to have a perfect first. It has a 2-note away major second, as does the major scale, and the related minor, the Aeolian mode. It's only the Phrygian that has a funny, flat second, as well as the Locrian, which is also funny. And then we've got a 3-note away minor third. That's to be expected because the third is the defining factor, making the Dorian a minor mode and a minor chord. So if that means that if I build a chord off of the Dorian scale, the 1, 3, 5 will be a minor chord. Now, you can also say, well, if I build a chord off of the D minor scale, it would also be a minor chord. So what's the difference between a Dorian mode and a minor mode? It's not in the 1, the 3, and the 5. It's in the difference between the sixth. The sixth is going to have the difference. So that's going to be, again, that's kind of important if you want to build more complex chords. If you're only building 3-note chords, you really only need to know that it's a minor chord versus a major chord, meaning you need to know the relation to the major scale has the 1, 4, 5 relation to the major scale has a major chord. The 2, 3, and 6 minor Locrian is the funny diminished chord. But if you want to go beyond the 1, 4, 5 and add a 7, 9, 11, and 13, the only way to do that by being in key is to expand your understanding past the 1, 3, 5. So that's past the third, basically. Okay, so then we have a perfect fourth, which we would expect on the major and the minor, as well as the Dorian. Most of the modes have a perfect fourth, and then except for which one doesn't have the perfect fourth? The Lydian. And then we have a 7-note away perfect fifth, which again is in all of the modes except for the crazy Locrian. It has a flat fifth. And then we have the weird one, a 9-note away major 6. So you would think, because Dorian is a minor mode, it would have an 8-note away minor 6, but it has a 9-note away major 6, 9-note away major 6. And then it has a 10-note away minor 7, which is what you would expect from a minor mode like the Dorian, rather than what the major has, which is an 11-note away major 7. So you can see the Dorian is actually like the in-between mode between kind of like the major and the minor, right? The major has all the perfects and then all majors on everything that's not a perfect. And then the one that's most minor, not the main minor, but the minorist of the modes is actually the Phrygian, which flips all of the majors, flattens them to the minors. The main minor, which is the Aeolian, actually isn't as minor-ish because it doesn't flip the second. It still has a 2-note away major second, and the Dorian is trying to play on both sides of the game because it not only keeps the 2-note away major second, but also keeps the 9-note away major 6. So it's closer to like a major scale in that sense. Now that also means that if I know this shape, then I can play all of these modes by just starting from these modes, and I can start to tweak this shape because I know that if I want to play around this D Dorian, then if I make that the tonic, I'm playing in D Dorian, meaning I play around that note. But if I want to play in D major, in D minor, instead of learning the whole new shape that would be in D minor, which I could do, that's fine to do, I could build that shape based on what I know and say, I'm just going to tweak the one note. I'm going to identify it. It's that B right here, right? So this B, I have a 9-note away major 6. If I wanted to convert from the D Dorian to the D minor, all I have to do is flatten that note. And if I do that, I can then think about the shape that results from it. And so I could, in my mind, say I'm going to build a whole different shape based on the fact that I'm thinking of myself in D minor. Or I can just say, I'm just going to pretend I'm in the same shape, except I'm going to recognize that one interval difference and just shift that in my mind. So when I'm noodling around, I'm just going to identify that one note difference. You will be playing a different shape by doing that, but you can see the perspective in your mind is different. You're looking at it from a different angle. I'm not looking at it, oh, it's a whole different thing. I'm looking at it, it's the same thing with one interval difference. That might be easier to kind of build upon, and then recognize it's a shape. I don't know. In any case, so now we're going to be going around this note, this D. Now, as we look at this D down here, we already did the D up top here, but the D up top is easier to deal with because most people, they start to learn their chord shapes by measuring down from there. So I learn the intervals below it. It's more difficult oftentimes to learn the intervals by saying, if that's my root, what about these strings above it? Why? Because I have to take the inverse distance. I'm doing an inverse interval. So that's really good practice to try to build your shapes from down below so that you can recognize not only building intervals from top to bottom, but you start to recognize what is the inverse intervals, what's the inverse relationship, and how can I build out chords, for example, from notes down here. We're also closer to the fault line, remembering that this tectonic plate shifted to the right, so we're living right on the fault line, just like I am here on the San Andreas. I hang my feet right into the San Andreas, and I say, what are you gonna do? You're gonna slip, tectonic's plate? You're gonna slip on me? I don't care. And then I spit into it just to see, because then that might get the plates, because there's tension between the plates. So if you spit in there, then maybe that'll get them. Maybe that'll make the tension going. But I don't care. I flirt with death over here. And any case, so that's what we're gonna do. So let's first just take a look at the octaves.